seats. The ceremony will begin in 2 minutes. Please silence your cell phones. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished visitors, on behalf of the University of North Georgia, our University Corps Cadets Association, the Corps Cadets, and the Department of Military Science, we would like to welcome you to this year's Memorial Retreat Ceremony.
Soldiers, let us sing, where no rockets fly nor bullets wing. Our broken brothers, let us bring to the mansions of the Lord. No more bleeding, no more fight, no prayers pleading through the night, just divine embrace, eternal light in the mansions of the Lord, where no mothers cry and no children weep. We will stand and guard though the angels sleep. All through the ages safely keep the mansions of the Lord. All through the ages safely keep the mansions of the Lord.
Due to a coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, we are having to make changes to our routine ceremony this weekend. We are glad that we are able to conduct this ceremony today. We are sorry that many alumni, parents, and other Corps supporters cannot attend in person today. I would like to introduce Cadet Major Wyatt Lastinger, the Brigade Chaplain, who will give today's invocation.
Please bow your heads and close your eyes if you so desire. Dear Lord, we thank you for your presence and love, which helps us to endure through difficult times. We thank you for moments like this, where we can honor those who have been chosen to be with you. We thank you for the peace that you give us, your peace that can exist within us, even when all around us there is no peace. As much as you comfort us who have gathered here today, we pray that in even greater measure that you will comfort the families and loved ones of those who have fallen. Be for them all that they need you to be at this moment, and continue to provide for them in every way in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead as they face life without their loved ones. Go with us now, Lord, we pray, as we reluctantly return to the world out there. Please don't let us soon forget our comrades, friends, and family who have fallen, but help us to honor their sacrifice through our lives lived for your glory. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for our national anthem, sung by UNG Patriot Choir, under the direction of Dr. Jack Broman.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Joseph Matthews, Commandant of Cadets, University of North Georgia.
Please be seated. First of all, I want to thank everyone for being here today. I know I speak for the alumni here when I say this is probably one of the most meaningful events of the weekend. And good or bad, we look forward to being here today. When I look at these granite walls, I see the names of classmates, friends, brothers in arms who gave the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. This place holds a very special place in my heart, and I think it does in everybody here. You know, I have the honor of introducing our guest speaker, Lieutenant Colonel Alan Kehoe. You know, he's a native of Snellville, Georgia. He received his commission in the infantry right here when we were called North Georgia College and State University. He's no stranger to these types of ceremonies. You see, last year he relinquished command of the 1st Battalion of the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard. You see, he was responsible for all the Army burials at Arlington National Cemetery. And he provided joint service support through the caissons and through the Presidential Salute Battery. Today he serves as the executive officer to the Director of Program Analysis and Evaluation in the Department of the Army Headquarters, G8 in the Pentagon. And I'm happy to report that he's been selected as a War College Fellow to the Tufts University Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. So please join me in welcoming one of our own, Lieutenant Colonel Alan Kehoe.
Well, we've been afforded phenomenal weather for today, and I'd like to start just by saying what a great job by the Patriot Choir. Can we give the Patriot Choir a round of applause real quick? Dr. Jacobs, Lieutenant General Fogarty, Colonel Matthews, Colonel Wright, distinguished visitors, the Corps cadets, students, and most importantly, family and friends of our great heroes and deceased alumni. Thank you for inviting me back to this special and solemn occasion. Colonel Matthews, thank you for that introduction. As I was hearing it, I was looking around for Major Nykirk, and I thought he may have mixed up some files. He may actually be one of the very few who still keeps hard files. But thank you, Major Nykirk, for the invitation as well, and more importantly, for believing in me when the raw materials were probably buried beneath youth and a little bit of immaturity. It's a great honor to return to this place that gave me my foundation in leadership and really my love for soldiering. Cadets, I can't believe it's been about 20 years since I stood in this same ceremony, and I can tell you surprisingly it feels like forever ago and just a moment ago, all at the same time. I thank you for what you've endeavored to become and commit to. And now let's take pause and remember our fallen. May we never forget their service and sacrifice. Before I begin my speech, I'd also like to ask all veterans to please stand so we can personally thank them for their service as well. When Christy and I drove onto campus Thursday night, we could not believe how much has changed. New construction, a new name, but one thing we noticed that has not changed, and that's the feeling that this place inspires, one of service and commitment. I'm proud of this great institution and the men and women it produces. Attending UNG remains one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. So some of you may be thinking, well, how did this guy get to be our guest speaker today? Which is a fair question. Or you might be asking a better question, which is, how can anyone's words today properly honor and pay adequate respect to UNG's fallen on this day? Well, like many of my peers, I've served our nation in a time of war and have witnessed firsthand the sacrifice that we talk about today. Additionally, as mentioned before, I was afforded a very, very unique opportunity in commanding 1st Battalion of the 3rd Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard. Today I wish to weave all that experience from combat to the Old Guard together to really share with you what I've learned about service, sacrifice, and the solemn duty of honoring our fallen. I'm humbled to be here with you today, and frankly, I feel a little inadequate standing next to these granite markers in their presence of this great place of honor and respect. Corey, you look great. I've enjoyed meeting many of you in my short time back this weekend, starting on Thursday with golf and the Crown Mountain Run this morning. I look forward to meeting many more of you in the days to come. I do hope that one day you will feel the same way that my wife and I do about this institution. This institution has a plethora of great people, and all gave me an opportunity to learn and grow in my time here, mostly mature, if I'm honest. I had some great mentors and role models to look up to. Many are here today, some are not. Major General Joe Girard, Colonel Chamberlain, Colonel Lord, Colonel Wells, Colonel Palmer, Colonel Shaw, Major Nykirk, First Sergeant Papka, and Sergeant First Class Young. Great faculty and staff with Miss Seabolt, Miss Fuller, and Miss Kelly. I had a tremendous amount of great professors, Dr. Reed, Dr. Hitt, and Dr. Friedman, just to name a few. Of note, one of the professors I just listed actually gave me my only failing grade in school. It was a WF, and for those of you who do not know what a WF is, neither did my dad. That was a tough explanation. But if those still exist, that's for when you miss more days than the syllabus allows. Well, I can tell you that I earned that WF, and I'm thankful for the powerful lesson it taught me about personal accountability and doing the work. I also had great peers, many I'll mention throughout the speech, but I'll also talk about one who I'll leave unnamed. This individual's impact got me to where I am today, without a doubt, sometimes daily. He again taught me the value of work and not to shortcut it, for this profession demands it, and I'll be forever thankful for that. Cadets, never underestimate the power that you have to impact one another while in school and throughout your careers. Treasure your time here because it will change rapidly after you graduate. Stay in touch with those you care about and who have helped you along the way. UNG's reputation across our Army could not be any stronger than it is right now, and I'm proud of that. And I am always quick to share that with anyone who generally regrets asking me after the ensuing 30 minutes of conversation. To the Corps Cadets, I don't remember many speeches that I heard in formation, and I can promise you I've stood in my fair share between UNG and the old guard. However, I do remember the lifelong lessons that this institution taught me that I still carry with me today. Foremost, a military career is very demanding, and it's a very serious profession. You have to dedicate yourself entirely to the oath to defend this nation. For those of you who will take the oath, read it and understand it. It is older than the republic that we defend. I encourage you to reaffirm that oath at every opportunity, every promotion, and take great pride in swearing others to it. The Army changes to meet the needs of this country, and make no mistake, you will be asked to meet those challenges ahead, and sometimes at great personal cost. I hope you don't have to deploy to combat, but if you do, be ready. Make sure your soldiers are ready. Always to remember the words of our current senior enlisted advisor to the chairman. This is one of my favorite quotes I've heard in the last 3 years. He says, "Amateurs train until they can get it right. Professionals train until they can't get it wrong." May this statement guide us all on how we train in the future. Not many chose the military life, and yes, it is a life. And quite honestly, there are some people in this nation who don't have the attributes to serve in our Army, and that's okay. But it is UNG graduates currently serving like Colonel Jason Williams, Colonel Christopher Steele, Lieutenant Colonel Kitafri Obaho that have taken up the call to serve our nation. You will be the next to take up this mantle in a long line of North Georgia graduates before you. Many have carried that reputation. Your turn to steward it is coming soon. I ask that you never forget the men and women of this great nation who died defending our country, and gave those who don't wish to serve the daily life choices that freedom allows all of us to have. I was a young officer when life changed on September 11th. Many of the cadets in formation today had not yet been born. Most of the freshmen are 18, most of the upperclassmen a couple years older. I remember that day very well. I was a newly commissioned second lieutenant waiting to attend the infantry officer basic course. I was actually working with my brother at a masonry supply store in Cumming when the first plane hit the North Tower. I saw it unfold on an old box TV with a terrible picture. While the picture was poor, the images hit home immediately. I was left feeling devastated, angry, And most importantly, I was left feeling ready to do my part in what was to come. In that instance, I began down a path that I have now walked for over 20 years. And shortly after that fateful day, I reported to the Infantry Officer Basic Course, and following that course and many courses after, I found myself in a patrol base in Florida Phaser Ranger School, where I learned that my first unit would deploy shortly after I got there in December of 2003. I was finally ready to do my part. My short 20-year military career, I've deployed 5 times, fighting in support of the global war on terror. I've served with some outstanding people. I trusted them with my life, and they trusted me with theirs. In these moments, I saw the sacrifices of Americans on full display every day. I learned the meaning of mission first and people always. Then a constant message to the force in my early years. Today that message is people first and winning matters. You may have heard the chairman or the chief of staff say it. Well, I'm here to tell you that these messages present the same paradox. And frankly, in my youth, I recited them with very little thought of a deeper meaning. Both mission accomplishment and care of our soldiers are critical, but which one is more important? And the answer is yes to both of those. If you want to truly understand this paradox, the answer lies with our fallen. Their sacrifice reminds us of the inherent dangers that go hand in hand with this profession. We must be prepared at a moment's notice to go into harm's way, and we must truly care for our personnel. They must be ready. That's why it's critical to honor and remember this sacrifice. It reminds us how to serve, why we serve, and most importantly, it reminds those of us in uniform how we should lead. Ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake about it. Our fallen make both the above statements I just mentioned true. They sacrificed so others did not have to, and found a way to win when winning was untenable at best. I have served with many who embody these statements. Some are carved on the granite markers next to me, and others are buried in sacred places across our country and beyond our shores. Our most sacred words and names are often etched and carved into stone, so they may never fade. 2004 to 2006, I served as a platoon leader and company executive officer with Seco 3rd Ranger Battalion, deploying twice to Afghanistan in that time. I remember a man passing through my neighborhood in Columbus, Georgia, walking his dog. And I, of course, a proud member of 3rd Ranger Battalion, was washing my truck in the standard shorts of the day, often referred to as Ranger panties, when we struck up a conversation. And he commented that his son was just on a Ranger contract, had just gotten his Ranger contract, and that he would be reporting to 375 soon. I expressed to him that there was no better place to serve. He would be placed in harm's way, exactly where the nation needed him most. He would be ready, and those around him would also be ready. Shortly after arriving to 375, he died during a combat operation in Afghanistan. His name is Private John M. Henderson, Jr., and his memory lives on in that community and in 375. 3rd Ranger Battalion will remember his sacrifice to this nation, and they do to this day with an annual memorial run that runs from his gravesite in Columbus to the steps of the headquarters of 375. This memorial run is conducted entirely in silence and during the hours of darkness. His father remains a prominent figure in the Columbus community and is a staunch advocate for military service. 2008 and 2009, I commanded Dog Company 1503 Infantry during some of the fiercest fighting in the GWAT. During this deployment, the 173rd would bury 43 soldiers and award 3 medals of honor for heroism during this 15-month period. This was service and sacrifice on a scale that I had never previously witnessed. Men and women gave everything they had, day in, day out. This 15-month deployment produced heroes like First Sergeant Michael Curry, who at the time was my soon-to-be company First Sergeant. True warrior, epitome of service and sacrifice. First Sergeant Curry spent his entire career as an airborne ranger, bouncing between the 82nd and the 173rd. He was a giant in the 173rd, known and respected by all. He was a great family man and well known for his abilities to care for his soldiers while never compromising mission accomplishment. He also had a larger-than-life personality, full of humor and humility, a combination that endeared him to all those around him. He was at the tail end of his career and knew this upcoming deployment would be a tough one. He also knew the company desperately needed his leadership. I was excited to take command of this company because I knew I was inheriting a great company and an even better First Sergeant. We began to get to know each other in earnest, knowing what was ahead. Sadly, First Sergeant Curry was killed in Afghanistan about 45 days before I took command of Dog Company. His presence was missed, the company was devastated, his memory still lives on today, and I would bet Dog Company 1503 still clings to his example of service and sacrifice. I first witnessed sacrifice in this very place, represented by the men and women on the granite markers to my side. Some names were placed on this wall while I was attending this university, and many since I have left. Men like Major Kevin Jenneret and Captain Jeremy Chandler, both graduates of 1995 graduates at NGC. Those cadets, those two were members of the aggressor platoon. I know they were proud the day they earned their Maroon Berets, and they were also airborne rangers on active duty. First Lieutenant Weston Lee, class of 14, is also listed on the marker. I know he was cut from the same mold. First Lieutenant Lee is also buried in Arlington National Cemetery. During my time in the Old Guard, I often visited his gravesite, seeking perspective. And every time I visited, I noticed many items left on his grave. Patches, tabs, coins, flowers, pictures. We should all take comfort in knowing that First Lieutenant Lee is visited daily at his current resting place. All these UNG heroes understood the essence of what it means to serve. These stories are available to all, and their names are ours to remember and echo into eternity. Friends, I know we have come here today with heavy hearts. We miss those we have lost. And I have been to some of the places where these brave men gave their last full measure of devotion to this nation. They never gave up, and neither will we. It saddens me that they're not here with us today, but I know their memories will live forever. This institution will not let their memories fade. For my first 18 years in the Army, I witnessed countless acts of sacrifice in combat. I mentioned a few from my experience, and we've talked about several who attended this university. But following this experience, I commanded 1st Battalion of the Old Guard. And it was in this mission that I was reintroduced to sacrifice, the fallen, and their families from a completely different perspective. Many say the best Americans are buried in Arlington National Cemetery. And after spending 3 years there, I can tell you the best American families are buried there and in military cemeteries across our nation. Over my tenure, I witnessed 36 Dover transfer missions for those active duty soldiers killed in combat, where their remains were first introduced back onto U.S. soil. I saw soldiers buried in Arlington National Cemetery from the Civil War to operations that continue today, including most conflicts this country has ever been involved in. I saw privates to 4-star generals buried, retirees to active duty, women and men, mothers and fathers, in every ethnic background you can think of. All buried side by side in Arlington National Cemetery. All their stones identical. Uniform in size, color, and shape. Many sections were completely filled in during my time there. Section 60, where active duty deaths are buried, expanded 3 rows in my time in command. As I reflect on this time, I want to share one story that I think everyone should hear. In my time in the Old Guard, I often participated in high-level ceremonies and memorials involving Army senior leaders. And one time in particular, we were hosting a partner nation's Minister of Defense for a wreath laying at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. SMA Daly, Dan Daly, Sergeant Major of the Army at the time, and the Chief of Staff of the Army at the time, General Mark Milley, both hosted this ceremony, and they shared this story with me. The SMA and the CSA rode with our partners through Arlington National Cemetery toward the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Along the way, they passed through a 120-man personnel corridor, observing the beauty of ANC and the discipline and commitment of the cordon, soldiers in the cordon. Cannons could be heard firing simultaneously in the background as they approached. Along the way, the Minister of Defense posed a question to the Sergeant Major of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army. He said, "Do you know why U.S. soldiers fight so hard?" And the SMA and the CSA peppered him with guesses, but were rebuffed with their responses. Next, the minister plainly said, "These are all good reasons, but the real reason is that the U.S. military honors their dead better than most countries honor their living." Ladies and gentlemen, may we endeavor for this to always be the case in the United States of America. Our partner recognized the power of mission accomplishment and caring for our soldiers. Honoring our fallen was a perfect visual depiction of that commitment. I would be remiss if I didn't say a few words about the marker to my far left. There are a few names on the marker that I personally know. They didn't get a chance to serve their country. Their lives ended too soon. Some were innocent victims of tragic accidents. Some made bad decisions. Some died of illness. Almost all of us have been touched by tragedies such as these. Cadets and students in attendance here today, please make good, sound decisions. Find real connection at this institution. Mentors, faculty, professors, peers. My list I gave you before is how I navigated tough times and decision making, not only in this institution, but while serving on active duty. No one should tackle life in a vacuum through a pseudo set of connections that are too easy to maintain and far less helpful when difficulty arises in your life. Invest in one another. Nurture meaningful relationships throughout your life, and you will be amazed at how often they see you through the toughest of times. If you have a friend that is down and out and they need help, please get them help. Get them connected. Families and friends of those students whose names are added to the marker this year, I'm very sorry for your loss, and I hope you find peace as you travel down the path of life. Families and friends of those alumni names that we read today, I'm sorry for your loss, and all of UNG mourns with you today, and every day for that matter. I'll close with another story, and many of you know that our institution and nation lost a great American hero in 2013, Colonel retired Ben Purcell. As many of you also know, the plaza between Gaylord, Liberty, and Patriot Hall is named after him. And for those of you who have not been up there, I recommend a trip up there. It's quite a tribute to quite a man. He was a great person. He was a great example of sacrifice for this great nation and state. I had the chance to meet Colonel Purcell when I was a cadet here, and I was in awe of what he experienced in captivity during the Vietnam War. He was the highest ranking U.S. Army officer held as a POW in that war, and he spent almost 5 years of his life confined, alone in a cell. Can we really even imagine what he experienced? On his release from Hanoi in March of 1973, and upon his arrival at Clark Air Base in the Philippines, I think he summed this up for me best when he said, "Man's most precious possession, secondly only to life itself, is freedom. And all of us in uniform, and all of us, frankly, would be better off if we remembered and reflected on those words daily." Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. And as we reflect on our lives and those we have lost, let us never forget our commitment to our fallen and the families. Thank you very much, and may God bless every one of you.
North Georgia has always sought ways to honor alumni who have fallen in battle. Many alternatives were considered to find an acceptable memorial in students who had lost their lives while attending North Georgia College and State University, and the University of North Georgia. The initial phase of construction on the memorial to your front was completed in April 1983. and dedicated in May of that year. The final phase of construction was completed with the unveiling of a bronze American Eagle entitled Freedom's Vigil in May of 1986. The memorial is divided into two sections. The first section honors those who gave their lives in battle, while the second honors students who died while attending North Georgia College and State University, and the University of North Georgia. There are 13 names on the World War I section. There are 12 names on the Korean War section. There are 113 names on the World War II section. And there are 29 names on the Vietnam War section. If there are any family members in attendance today of these great Americans, please stand and be recognized. Thank you. 15 years ago, on April 22nd, 2006, during Parents Alumni Weekend, we dedicated the Lost in Combat Memorial to your front to recognize the North Georgia alumni and students who have been killed in combat since September 11th, 2001, fighting the global war on terror. There are 4 names dedicated that beautiful April day. Staff Sergeant Thomas Vitigliano, Staff Sergeant Charles Warren, Captain Jeremy Chandler, and Specialist Paul Saylor. During our 2009 ceremony, we added our 5th name to the marker, the name of Master Sergeant Mitchell Young. In 2010, we added our 6th and 7th names, Major Kevin Jenneret and Sergeant Andrew McConnell. In 2018, we added our 8th name to the marker, First Lieutenant Weston Lee, class of 2014. There are no names to add to the marker this year. Will the family members and friends of these great Americans please stand and be recognized? Thank you. Each year, we read the names of alumni and students who have died since our last service to consecrate the memorial. There are 76 names on the student section. There is 1 student name to be added to the memorial wall this year, David Zhu. Will the family and friends of David please stand and be recognized? Thank you. Deceased alumni and friends since our last service are
from the class of 1939, Mr. Ronald Fisher. From the class of 1940, Mr. Thomas Stewart. From the class of 1942, Mrs. Flo Jordan Cromer. Admiral Robert Scarborough. From the class of 1943, Mr. Stuart Schwartz. Mr. Kerry Cash. From the class of 1944, Mr. Frank Vardaman. From the class of 1945, Mrs. Lurleen Smelly Coleman. Mr. James Lyle. Mr. William Ingram. From the class of 1946, Mr. Franklin Sheffield. From the class of 1948, Mrs. Helen Pierce Taylor. Mr. Samuel Freeman. From the class of 1949, Mr. Billy Hargett. Dr. Garland Pinholster. Mrs. Mary Anderson Dews. Dr. Alan Johnson. Mr. Ben McCree. Mrs. Christine Davis Seiler. Dr. William Sell. From the class of 1950, Mr. Frank Norton. Mr. Lawrence Nash. Dr. James Clay, alumnus and former NGCSU Foundation trustee. Mr. Frank Layton. Mr. Max Whitaker. Commander Thomas Muaney. Mr. Walter Peacock. Mrs. Mary Thompson Overstreet. From the class of 1951, Brigadier General James Cook, Mr. Young Simmons, Mr. Jack Thompson, Mr. James Hurt, Mrs. Jane Thurmond Braswell, Mr. Lawrence Nelms. From the class of 1952, Mrs. Alice Staten King, Lieutenant Colonel William Davidson, Mr. Thomas Cheek. From the class of 1953, Mr. Edgar Bird, Mr. Oris Matthews, Mrs. Anna Bird Holbrook. From the class of 1954, Mrs. Betty Shearhouse Lowe, Mr. Fred Kitchens, Dr. William Atha, Mrs. Frankie Power, Mrs. Emma-Jean Chastain Darnell. From the class of 1955, Mrs. Bobby Bagwell Orr, Mrs. Patricia Shore Minor. From the class of 1956, Mrs. Patricia Shattuck Coleman, Mr. Jack McKinley, Colonel Retired Carrie Joyner. From the class of 1957, Mr. Parker Lowry, Mr. Cheever Lambert, Mr. Troy Bledsoe, Mr. Reuben Black. From the class of 1958, Mr. James Reese, Mrs. Nancy Barnes McDonald, Mr. Daniel Barden, Mr. Philip Hogue, Mrs. Maureen McDuffie Ward, Lieutenant Colonel Retired William Hammond. From the class of 1959, Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth Melton, Mrs. Jeanette Cooley. From the class of 1960, Mrs. Catherine Havey Phoenix, Mr. William Baggett, Mr. Joel Fletcher, Dr. June Westmoreland Parks, Mr. Robert Smith, Mrs. Patty Newton Borders, Dr. James Bland. From the class of 1961, Mr. Charles Davidson, Mr. Harry Bunkley, Mrs. Betty Bryson Jenkins, Mrs. Ramona York Skinner, Mr. Harold Brown, Mrs. Tonawanda Kanade Carter, Mr. Charles Wilcox, Mrs. Maddie Worley Edison. From the class of 1962, Mr. J. Caldwell, Mr. James Holm, Colonel Retired Bobby Adams, Mr. Dean Biskey, Mr. Richard Cousins. From the class of 1963, Mrs. Margaret Smith Cousins, Mr. Lemuel Buis, Mr. Hoyt Cannon. From the class of 1964, Mrs. Patricia Simpson Heath, Mr. Cecil Reed, Dr. Robert Dismukes, Lieutenant Colonel Retired Edward Kennedy, Mr. Henry King, Mr. Leroy Young, Mrs. Shirley Gravitt Holtzclaw. From the class of 1965, Mr. Thomas Odom, Mr. John Shope, Mrs. Laura Gooch. From the class of 1966, Captain Retired Ralph Colley, Mr. James Truelove. From the class of 1967, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Anderson, Mrs. Melbury Cagle, Mr. James Goins, Miss Sherry Weagle Ains. From the class of 1968, Dr. Julian Hayes, Mr. Anthony Vaia, Mr. Hugh Mills, Mrs. Laureen Wright Davenport, Mrs. Lou Kaysen Demore. From the class of 1969, Colonel Retired Barrett King, Mrs. Melinda Baker Roberts, Mrs. Opal Tanner Horde, Mrs. Marjorie Emmerich Suchke Brownlee, Mrs. Linda Wilson Jones. From the class of 1970, Mr. Kenneth Lowe, Mr. Ernest Arp, Mr. James Atkins. From the class of 1971, Mrs. Charlotte Roanoke Livingston.
Lieutenant Colonel Retired John Ham, Miss Mary Wynn Matthews. From the class of 1972, Mr. Michael Webb, Miss Barbara Tanner Green, Mr. Douglas Walker, Mr. Hal Haynes, Major Retired Jack Wright. From the class of 1973, Miss Elizabeth Beggs Crona, Miss Marilyn Barge Whitehurst, Mr. Larry Bannister. From the class of 1974, Mr. Thomas Hawley. From the class of 1976, Mr. John Twiggs. Reverend Richard Dale. The Honorable Alan Pilcher. Mr. David Jones. From the class of 1977, Captain Retired Andrew Willis. From the class of 1978, Mr. Philip Sartain. Miss Joanne Armour Stone, former Gainesville State Foundation trustee. Miss Linda Reeves Allen. Miss Linda Fowler Massey. From the class of 1980, Mr. Lee Grissom. Miss Virginia Cornelson. From the class of 1981, Mr. John McErney. Mr. Lawrence Blocker. From the class of 1982, Miss Brenda Cronin. Mr. Charles Mueller. From the class of 1983, Miss Virginia Smith Reedy. Lieutenant Colonel Donald Hackle. From the class of 1986, Major Retired Todd Graham. Class of 1987, Ms. Dina Colbreth Wayne, alumnus and former Gainesville State Council member. Major Lars Trey Pearson. The class of 1988, Ms. Rhonda Shilton Shiflett. Mr. William Cutright. From the class of 1990, Miss Michelle Powell. From the class of 1991, Sergeant Major Retired Bobby Richardson. From the class of 1992, Mr. Wilson Moon. Mr. James Albanese. From the class of 1993, Mr. Carl Hudson. From the class of 1994, Mr. Scott Pennington. From the class of 1995, Miss Patricia Robinson Childers. From the class of 1996, Mr. Charles Wade. Mr. Stuart Bozeman. From the class of 1997, Miss Lynn England. Miss Bonnie Whale. Ms. Joy Zito. From the class of 2002, Mr. John Lancaster. From the class of 2004, Mr. Frederick Smith. From the class of 2006, Mr. Jerry Kielser. From the class of 2007, Miss Elizabeth Love. From the class of 2008, Miss Starla Jones. From the class of 2013, Mr. Charlie Helseth. From the class of 2016, Mr. Jonathan Walker. From the class of 2018, Mr. Andrew Kinsey. From the class of 2020, Miss Jasmine Luke. From the class of 2021, Miss Rachel Koenig. Miss Jacqueline Christian Pennington, a friend of the university. Miss Von Seal Erickson, former Gainesville State Foundation trustee. Dr. Jack Jones, retired staff. Mr. James Walters, former UNG Advisory Council. Dr. Ellington, retired faculty. Mr. Warren Blackman, former Gainesville State Foundation trustee. Mr. Ronald Jenkins, retired staff. Dr. Peter McDonald, retired faculty. Miss Peggy Dover, retired staff. Mr. George Brown, retired staff. Miss Harriet Burson, retired staff and a parent. Miss Melissa Autry Tanner, retired staff. Dr. Monica Longino Healer, retired staff. Dr. Milton Martin, former Gainesville State Foundation trustee. Mr. Jewel Dowdy, retired staff. Miss Carol Anderson Wallace, retired staff. Mr. Michael Stapleton, retired staff and a parent. Mr. Jimmy Gable, retired staff. Ms. Barbara Jones, retired staff. Mr. Irvin Crow, retired staff. Miss Jane Witten, retired staff. Dr. Hank Huckabee, friend of the university and a former chancellor of the University System of Georgia Board of Regents. Will the family members of those alumni names read today please stand and be recognized? Thank you. Each year, we place a wreath at the memorial to commemorate all of the alumni who were killed in battle, all of the alumni who have passed away since last year's ceremony, and those students who lost their lives while attending the University of Georgia, North Georgia. This year's wreath, honoring all of our alumni and students who have passed away since this time last year, will be placed by Lieutenant Colonel retired Mike Webb, Chairman of the North Georgia Corps of Cadets Association. Serving as wreath bearer today is Cadet Specialist Andrea Miersch of Alpha Company. Several cadet units are participating in today's ceremony. Representing the Blue Ridge Rifles is the firing detail, commanded by Cadet Corporal Mike Joseph of Delta Company. The ceremonial color guard is led by Cadet Second Lieutenant Jade Haney of Golf Company. Serving as bugler is Cadet Staff Sergeant Anthony Stovall of Delta Company. Serving as cannoneer in the howitzer section, located on Purcell Plaza, is Cadet Captain Dylan Evans of Headquarters and Headquarters Company. Representing the Corps of Cadets is the Honor Company for fall semester of 2020, Alpha Company, under the command of Cadet Captain Nicholas Pujols. The First Sergeant is Kamlin Soga. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the playing of Retreat into the Colors. We do not formally end our ceremony because we continue to remember our fallen comrades, graduates, and students throughout the year.